we've lost 722,000 Americans to overdose, right? To drug overdose. And that's 12 Vietnam Wars, right? And very much like Vietnam.
Whoa.
Yeah, very much like Vietnam, it took out our best and brightest. And so for us living in Huntington in 2016, we all of a sudden had started getting a lot of national media, and we all knew that like all hell had broke loose.
Dave Lavender, I'm so excited to have you on the show today. You wear a lot of hats: journalist, community leader, president of Hope in the Hills, and the driving force behind Healing Appalachia, the world's largest recovery-focused music festival. You've dedicated your life to building connection through storytelling, service, and music, and the work you've done has brought real hope to thousands of people across Appalachia and beyond. I can't wait to dive into your journey, the heart behind this movement, and the lessons you've learned along the way.
Fantastic. Alexander, thank you so much for having us on. And I feel very blessed to be here and tell a little bit of our story. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we feel the same way. We're so excited to have you. And so, Dave, you were born in Southern Ohio and eventually made your way to West Virginia. Can you paint a picture of what your early life was like and how those roots shaped your sense of community?
Yeah, absolutely. So my dad, my grandfather, and my uncle were all steelworkers, and they were all Baptist preachers. And so, I didn't think about this until later, Alexander, but I feel very lucky to have very early on, been able to think outside myself. And, so my dad is a pastor and has, he's now in his 80s. And, but, he always like thought of other people and, would be the guy who, comes to the church in an old beat up car and has a trunk full of like vegetables to give to the old folks in the, in his congregation, and then would go visit them, in the hospitals. And like, he just preached a funeral for my, one of my really good friends growing up, Kevin Lewis, his father, Don. And, it's just a beautiful thing, man. So like, I was just thinking about how much community and, the community meaning everyone, right? And like, there not being an us and them, that being very much ingrained in my, DNA from the beginning. And so I feel very lucky to have been able to think outside myself, to be empathetic, to be compassionate, and to recognize that every person is a gift and a beautiful soul. And you know what? We know we don't need to be judged on our worst day. And so anyway, so that's carried forth with me, that just kind of beautiful kind of community. And my mom, there was 4 of us kids in 3.5 years. And so she was like Girl Scout and Brownie leader, and like band leader, and like was over the band boosters and, the youth at the church. And so, I was one of those rare kids that we were always out, in the public. And I was laughing about this with Kathy Mateo one time. She was coming to speak into the Girl Scouts. And I said, Kathy, we have something in common. I was in the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts. Because my mom was the Girl Scout and Brownie leader, and I went to all the meetings. And so anyway, so I've always been just sort of like part of the tribe, and it's always been very natural for me to love people and love them where they're at, and just to be a small part of it. And so that's very much colored my existence, and I feel very grateful for being raised like that, being raised outward, thinking outward.
And Dave, you then pursued a career in journalism. Do you think that having this strong sense of community is what made you want to dedicate your life to telling stories across multiple formats?
Oh, for sure. My like I said, my dad, uncle, and grandfather were all ministers, and my dad and my uncle, they also spent about 40 years working side by side, but then also were like sang gospel music and traveled, with my aunts. And so I was just always around storytellers. And then my mom, with 4 young kids, she would take us to the library. And so very early on, I could read very early. And so, I just loved stories and I loved storytelling. Something came to me very naturally. And I just was always very inquisitive about the world. I just couldn't read enough books. And then I was really into sports growing up. And so I thought I was going to be a sports journalist, And so I loved the drama and stuff of the of sports, and I was always around music, so I could always play music. So I loved music. I loved sports. I kind of loved it all. I kind of was not great at anything. I always said in basketball I was short, but I made up for it by being slow. And so but I knew that I loved stories and I could tell stories, and that people loved when I told a story. I remember very early on, I was covering a girls' basketball game, and I was in college, and I went from like answering the football phones to like being a journalist covering basketball and stuff and girls' sports 5 nights a week. And all of the girls like stood up and cheered when I walked in. They saw that I was going to be covering the game because I gave it a lot. I saw them, right? I gave them juice, and I gave them a lot of energy, and I was, I guess, maybe a more unique storyteller than some of the people that maybe, weren't too happy about covering it. So I've always like tried to bring that inquisitiveness and also like just an open mind to events, because you don't know, man. You don't like, you could pass somebody on the street and you're like, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. So I've always like held judgment on things, but then also just been voraciously curious about all of my community, whether somebody looks like me or not. And so that's always been a beautiful way to explore the world. I feel very grateful to have explored the world as a journalist.
Before Healing Appalachia, you served on more than a dozen nonprofit community boards.
Yeah.
What led you to your first nonprofit that you served on?
Okay, yeah, sure. So I was a journalist. So I did 5 internships in college, right? And then when I became a professional writer, became a feature writer. So I worked outside Nashville, worked outside Columbus, Ohio, and Chillicothe. And then when we moved back to Huntington, I had been reading a lot, like out of the Utne Reader. That was like a real progressive, like collection of grassroots solutions. It kind of reminds me of so David Byrne from Talking Heads, he has a really cool media group called Reasons to be Cheerful. And so it's like grassroots solutions. It's like people not sitting on the sidelines, but solving stuff themselves. And so I was very intrigued with and wanted to very much put my energy to work to help folks. As journalists, we try to stand back and be as objective as possible. Right. But then when I moved back, Alexander, when I moved back home to Appalachia, I realized that our problems are such, we're moving back to West Virginia, which is the 3rd oldest state. It's like Maine, Vermont, us, and so it's an older state. And so if anybody's going to help out, you're looking at it in the mirror, like it can't be just folks in their 70s, that were serving on these boards. And I realized real quick too, when I moved back to Huntington, that like there was this old guard, and that if things were going to change, that we needed to get involved. And so my first thing that I got involved with, I started covering this group called the Neighborhood Institute. And so it was like the mothership for the 12 different neighborhoods in Huntington. And so I started covering it, and then they're like, hey, you take notes. Why don't you just take notes, and you could be the secretary. So I became secretary of the Neighborhood Institute. Then I started then got in with Create Huntington, which was like a creative placemaking group. And that was kind of where I met, or not where I met, but where I got Ian Thornton involved, who's Tyler's manager. I got him involved in that organization, as well as Kibi Gilkerson, who also works for Whizbang Booking Management. And so those really just lit a fire in me. We were doing all kinds of really neat creative placemaking, and we were sort of just making that stuff happen, whether it was like supporting the roller derby girls, or starting bicycle groups. Like we started back then, a good buddy of ours, Jesse Clark, started Critical Mass, and we just celebrated our 16th anniversary of just getting together once a month to ride bicycles and show folks that that pedestrian safety and bicycle safety is important. So I think just like coming back, that was my first little foray, is these neighborhood groups, and then Create here in Huntington.
Well, I think it's so great that you did that, Dave, because I feel like that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that was probably having those experiences in those smaller groups kind of laid the foundation for all of the work that you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you learn Robert's Rules of Order, and you learn all of the bones of like what does a nonprofit do? What can it do? How can it activate the people? And I would say a really important. We had this movement called Create Huntington. That was kind of connected. It was a connective group, right? And so we founded things like a big beer festival that's still here called Rails and L's. So a lot of like things that were like tourist based, but then we also like had a thing called Cafe Huntington. We would support up and coming like startup little businesses, arts businesses. And so really helped like dozens of people get their start. And so, yeah, it really set the bones for, me learning the ropes. And then I went from there and did, as the kids got older, I was secretary at the middle school PTO. And then I was president of my high school alumni association. And we went from giving $700 in scholarships to now I've handed the baton off, but we give about $30,000 in scholarships. And this is at a little school that doesn't graduate 50 people. It's a little very rural school, and but we're real proud giving people in a very poor place a big start, And so, and I was Boy Scouts. I was a Boy Scout leader for a long time, and sort of have and it was at the Coalition for the Homeless here in Huntington, and during that time, I brought on the McElroy brothers to do Justin, who I worked with, and Clint, his dad, the McElroy family podcasters. They went and did the candle nights and would give all the money to the Homeless Coalition. And so like always have used arts, as a projector to propel, social change, and then also to propel, good, and to activate people to help you do that good,
And Dave, I want to talk about August 15th, 2016, the day 26 people overdosed in Huntington, West Virginia. How did that tragic day become the catalyst for the creation of Hope in the Hills and eventually Healing Appalachia?
Yeah, man. I mean, so, I say that Huntington was, the spear point for the opioid crisis, right? And so we know from 1999 to today, we've lost 722,000 Americans to overdose, right? To drug overdose. And that's 12 Vietnam Wars, right? And very much like Vietnam.
Whoa.
Yeah, very much like Vietnam, it took out our best and brightest. And so for us living in Huntington in 2016, we all of a sudden had started getting a lot of national media, and we all knew that like all hell had broke loose, in that we had a lot of friends, who were passing away. And, as like in the music community, we're all empaths, right? And so a lot of people in the music community have been, the substance use disorder has been a disease that has afflicted many. Wouldn't we love to still have Jerry Garcia and, Amy Winehouse, Whitney Houston, Tom Petty, Prince, right? And so we had a bunch of friends, that have passed away back in the day. And just, it really freaked everybody out. You know what I mean? I would say that I was on a couple different boards at that time, and I'm on the Convention and Visitors Bureau board here. I've been on that for a long time. But, I remember one thing that one of our community leaders said in 2016. His name's Audie Perry, and he owns Heritage Farm Museum and Village. And he said, right now, we're the worst in America for the opioid crisis. But one day, maybe we can be the city of solutions, and we can show people the way. And so Audie's words that he said through tears really have come to fruition. And so there's many things that have been birthed here in Huntington. I'll give you just a few examples. So we have one that's we have a first responders wellness program that the Bloomberg Foundation helped us set up here. And so, helping our first responders who were also going down the rabbit hole of addiction, and who were also having severe mental trauma from dealing with all these overdoses, right? And so we have very compassionate people at that time, like Jan Rader, who was one of Time's 100 most influential people of the year. She was the fire chief, West Virginia's first female fire chief. She helped implement some of this stuff. Places like Lily's Place that help take care of babies that were born into addiction. And some really, really neat things that have started here and that have been now. And the quick response team, so the QRT, so the quick response teams are putting a social worker in with cops, in with first responders to make sure that the person that's overdosed, that we get them a bed in a facility, And so that's been cutting edge as well. And there's a lot of other stuff that's been created here. Project Hope that Len O'Connell does, that has mothers going through recovery with their kids, which is a fascinating and amazing. Keep those families together, keep the moms and the babies' bonds together, because we know that childhood trauma is like a big feeder for addiction, right? And so so from that 2016, date, we knew that we couldn't sit on the sidelines. Kind of like when I moved back home and I saw all these problems and sort of an older population. And I knew that I had to be moved to action. And I know that, that's what created Hope in the Hills and Healing Appalachia, is that, and I will say this is a really great thing to share with musicians and artists and people. You don't have to put on Farm Aid out of the gates. You can put on a tiny little, music thing, for somebody. You can help wherever you're at. You don't have to wait till you get to be a big star to have a foundation. And Tyler was always like that. I mean, he and Ian, in 2016, we had big floods here in West Virginia, and they got a bunch of folks together and raised more money in one night at our little bar, the V Club, now the Loud. They raised more money in one night than like the McDonald's had all week, right? And so I think that we understood, pretty quickly that, and Tyler was way down on that bill. There was a bunch of other bigger bands, at the time, but he knew out of the gates that, it didn't matter until he wasn't going to wait till he got big. He was ready to help now and use his music for good. And so that sort of like lit a fire under all of us, that the folks that started it, Charles Hatcher and Ian and, and I was covering it all at the time. And I just remember how proud they were, our first Healing Appalachia, we had a check for about $9,000. It was one bed for one person for a whole year at Recovery Point. And that was in 2018, when they gave that, and, but yeah, so that was kind of it. We saw this happening. We saw we were on the world stage, but nobody had to tell us, the Guardian didn't have to tell us that this was a problem like no other. And then everybody else would soon find out later, right? I mean, we went up to about 110,000 people died, 2 years ago. And now we're back down to 80, thank God to a lot of good work being done by grassroots groups out there and governments too, that have finally stepped up and making stuff happen,
722,000 Americans have been lost to the opioid crisis. That number is actually astonishing. And I feel I had no idea that it was that high.
Yeah.
I guess I have two questions now knowing this. Number one, why aren't more people talking about this? And number two, what do you think the problem is in our country that's contributing to this crisis?
Well, yeah, for sure, we were finally, getting a hold of it. It's, we went from 110,000 overdoses last year to 80,000, right? And that's been because people have become aware, and then also are taking action to address it. Of course, we know that greed fueled the spike where you had pharmaceutical companies who had just, littered the landscape, to make money on opioids, that were supposed to be very pinpointed use for pain, and they were throwing them out like parade candy. And of course, we know there's been a lot of documentaries made. Our good friends Kern and Elaine Sheldon made a Oscar-nominated documentary, Heroin, about some of the folks here fighting the epidemic and fighting the big pharmaceutical companies that, we're just making a killing. I've always said this, there's a difference between making a living and making a killing. And we know the government, everybody was in on it. Everybody knew that that after a little bit of time, everybody knew that these pharmaceutical companies were making a killing. And, that's on them. That scarlet letters on them for the rest of their lives, and what has happened, what has been tough to deal with, Alexander, is that there's always been a shame involved, in drug use, right? But we know that substance use disorder is a disease, right? And that, we are all in it together. And our co-founder, Charlie Hatcher, says this a lot. He says, you know what? Drug addiction doesn't care how much you make. It doesn't care who you pray to. It doesn't care how famous you are. It does not care. We've recently teamed up with Matthew Perry Foundation, and, they are just incredible. And, Matthew fought addiction for years. And so, here's somebody at the top of their game, right? And like I said, and I mentioned before, all of the stars that have fought addiction. And, but so there being this kind of shame factor, a lot of people look at it, a lot of pretty judgy McJudgerson, right? And so they make it an us and them. And so one thing that we try to really do with Healing Appalachia is bust down that stigma and say there is no us and them. It's just us. And guess what? Nobody else is coming to the rescue. It's got to be all of us at the table, right? And so we can't point a finger at, the guys and gals in the backpacks that are, trying to do better and have hit bottom and are now trying to claw their way back up, and so, but we see a lot of people that do that don't think their lives are worth anything. And, unfortunately in our country, we're seeing it's almost a national pastime for people to punch down on the most vulnerable and to punch down on people who are poor and punch down on people who are different. And that's really a sad place. And, spiritually, we got to get into a better place where we know that every life is a sacred gift, and every person is worth it. I often say, for people who don't understand that, I said, my favorite teenage heroin addict was James Taylor. He was addicted to heroin. He was in and out of mental hospitals when he was a teenager. Also got signed to Apple Records, right? So that we knew he had lots of promise, but he also had lots of issues because he, was dealing with substance use disorder. Well, we know he got better. We know he's a bright light that, my God, what would the world be without James Taylor and that sweet baby James? We loved him songs, right? Right? So we just got to smash that mentality, that us and them mentality. And I would also say that too. I think that, for places around the country and the world that are dealing with this, that if you don't deal with it, if you don't treat people well, there's always saying, you can pay now or later. And if you don't pay for prevention, if you don't pay for early childhood intervention, if you don't pay for dealing with kids with early childhood trauma, well, guess what the threat is through addiction? Childhood trauma, right? And so those are a lot of the folks who are susceptible to substance use disorder. So we really need to do anything we can to double, triple, quadruple down on taking care of our kids and our youth, and to make sure that folks know how to address trauma in a healthy way, whether that's through music, through art therapy, through nature therapy, and through therapy, talking things out, and so, I would say so the thing that's been tough too, I think, for the United States and a lot of other places to get their arms around is that it's really affected like every part of society. So when I've been on all these different boards, like the Coalition for the Homeless, like the Boy Scouts, all these different boards. Well, guess what? Each one of those organizations had very unique situations because of the fallout of the opioid crisis. Like my Boy Scout troop, we had like 3 kids, being raised by their grandparents, because they didn't have parents, like their parents had died. We had, one kid who's, his dad would drop him off and then he'd do heroin in the, Methodist parking lot. And so the opioid crisis has impacted all the way across the line in America, from foster care to, like, grand families happening, to of course, an overload of, it's America, so they lock up anybody that doesn't move, pretty much. I mean, right, we're the most incarcerated country in the world, and so with the opioid crisis, they had no idea what to do with people, so they just were locking everybody up. So then, what do we do with reentry and recovery? Right, recovery to work, reentry, right? And so those are all things that we got to address. And I think that we have to address those with an open heart and an open mind. So that's been one thing with Healing Appalachia. We've been trying to put a lot of juice in. We know we can't fix everything, but we try to like be educated, because I'm a journalist, right? So we try to be like very up to date on what's happening, where's the movement, who needs money. And so if that's like, helping out kids camps for kids in trauma, like Camp Mariposa, Hickman Holler and Healing Appalachia helped fully fund that 2 years ago in Eastern Kentucky, or like giving a lot of juice to like the West Virginia Reentry Council, showing people movies about, hey, here's what reentry looks like, right? And so we think through art and music and films, that we can do narrative change too, because you throw a lot of numbers out. Like I threw out the number about how many people have died. Well, that's it's a lot to take in. But I think if you show them a person and tell their story, it can move hearts and move minds, and thus move systems, right? Like let's recalibrate our systems to something that works for all the people, and not just people that some people deem worthy. Because we have seen so many miracles. That's been the beautiful thing. I'm just riffing now, I guess, but we just seen so many miracles, so many people that we got a good buddy that helps us with Healing Appalachia, Jerome Comer. And, he was homeless like probably 7 or 8 years ago and was in addiction. Now he owns his own construction company. He's done done work for me. His company at my house. They're amazing. There's amazing guys. And they he's just a beautiful person, man. Everybody knows him. Like he goes to tons of concerts, and just living a beautiful, sober life, and 7 years ago, a lot of people would have thrown Jerome away, and he's just a beautiful person. Yeah. And still blooming every day, man. He inspires me every day. He's always posting inspiring things. And I'm just like, I love that kind of stuff.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that hearing stories like these really does inspire us to want to, contribute and make a difference in any way that we can. I actually, one of the previous guests on this podcast, he's a singer. His name's Honest Dave. He actually lost his dad and brother to overdose. And he wrote a song about it that's called "I'd Rather Overdose." And through his music, he has been able to help so many people heal in that journey. So I couldn't agree more that hearing stories like this, and especially when it's translated into the arts, like in movies or music in this case, it really is healing. And another thing that you talked about that I also want to just address that's interesting is that this is a unique disease in that it does not care who you are, where you come from, it can affect you. And the other thing that's kind of challenging about that too is another thing that's challenging about this is also that there isn't a specific medicine or one size fits all cure for every single person. Everybody's so different. With this in mind, what do you think have been some of the most successful remedies, I guess, or solutions to people that are struggling with addiction?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I would say, a couple of things. And this is one of the reasons that Matthew Perry Foundation came looking for us, and it's teaming up with us to help with Healing Appalachia, and then also help us with some gives. On their website, they talk about the opposite of addiction is connection, and that's 100%. It's community. And Matthew had said that addiction wants to get you alone. It wants to get you away from all the people, and then it wants to kill you. And it's so true. And so we don't know. There is a lot. Everybody's so different, right? And there's a lot of different ways to the top of the mountain. And that top of the mountain is different for a lot of people. What is success, right? And so we know that everybody travels a different recovery road. So at Healing Appalachia, we're all musicians and we love all kinds of music and people, right? And so we have an open call for service providers. So this is people working in the industry, to help people where they're at, right? And so at our festival, we've had, this year we're gonna have over 90 service providers, and we'll have folks from all the way from New York down to Mississippi, right? And so people are all trying a little bit of different thing, and they're all doing like our friend Jenny Hill, she does Latang yoga. So she teaches yoga in women's prisons, and she teaches them to be yogis, to then pass that on, right? Pass that beautiful way of life, that way to breathe and work through difficult situations that can be trauma induced, right? And so and then we have people that do art therapy, and then we have people that are very religious based and have a faith component. What we try to say is that we don't know, and we know we have a ton of good friends, folks out there. You can look at a bunch of folks like DeMargo Price and and Billy Strings and different people who are like California sober, right? So that's a way for a lot of people, man. So it's like cannabis has helped a ton of people get through their whatever they had, if they had alcohol addiction or some other addiction, right? And so we know that different people have different ways. Some people use psychedelics, some people use a lot of different things. And so our thing is that we're not going to judge. We're going to let everybody who is a service provider come and share what they do, and then they can meet other people who are doing a best practice and learn a lot from them. And so we love that, and we know. So that's kind of the beautiful thing about the festival, is that it's this big, crazy quilt of solutions-based people. They all have in common that they have not sat on the sidelines, that they are in the game, and that they are here to celebrate recovery, and also to, hold up and, put into action that precious memory of folks that they've lost, right? And so, I think about that when we're doing our work. We do music therapy in about 5 different locations, including the West Virginia University Opioid Center with Hannah Bush, and we do it a lot. But when I started that during COVID, right before COVID, I did it because we had a good friend, Carrie Aaron Coates, who had a master's degree, and she had a sober venue called down here in Huntington that was beautiful, called Marigold. And she was in the punk scene, and she would bring in all kinds of super funky, folky punk people. But you know what? She relapsed and passed away, man. And she was creating all this good change. And so, I've thought a lot about me personally, thinking about me doing this work. I'm just thinking about those friends and people that I knew, like Carrie Aaron, who was just an exceptional person, a great musician, great songwriter, wonderful community person. So anyway, so that's kind of it. There's a lot of different ways to the top of the mountain. We're seeing a lot of things that really, that we love to support, And so I would say that, we're seeing a lot of movement with music therapy, which is great. We're seeing, I think, a lot of, and we're trying to do this, help normalize sober good times, and you're seeing that across the US, right? I mean, with mocktails and this year we got Athletic Brewing coming. And, I often said this, that, when you become an adult, you understand the volume knob doesn't go all the way to the right. You turn it back down a little bit, right? And so I think that we're trying to show people with Healing Appalachia that, one, there's a lot of different things. Come and find out what may spark you to be a better person, to maybe care more about other people, and, to get involved with stuff, right? And so my dad always said, and, if you want a blessing, be a blessing. And I think people see that, right? They come to the festival and they see things that work and they want to help it out. And so I think that, we give people that many ways to connect, and ideas, and a roadmap of there's many ways to the top of the mountain, and find something that works for you. Because not everybody's hey man, I want to go kayak, and that's going to help me out. That's me, but that somebody else might be that scares the bejesus out of me, man. I want to stay inside my apartment and, edit videos all day and change minds and hearts that way. And that's fantastic too. And so yeah, there's a lot of different things that are working. And that's kind of the beautiful thing, is that I think that we are very much inspired about the ways that people are going about making people better. And so we try to always shine a light on those people. And so one of the things we do, Alexander, with our funds that we raise at Healing Appalachia, which is like the farm aid for recovery, right? So we vet organizations, and then we give them money with no strings attached. We say the only strings attached are on our guitars. So, that's folks like Deep Time Coffee down in Asheville. They're just employing people coming out of prison, to have a coffee roaster. And so, that's the kind of beautiful thing that we love. It's like, hey, that's working in that community. They're putting people to work and they're making great coffee. So what's not to love? And coffee is definitely the fuel for the recovery industry,
And Dave, Healing Appalachia is now the world's largest recovery-focused music festival.
Yeah.
But I want to take it back a little bit, and I want to hear about the first year and some of the biggest obstacles in pulling this off.
Yeah, well, so when Charlie Hatcher, who's down in Lewisburg, and he and Ian Thornton worked together at Whiz Bang Booking and Management, right? And so they were really just getting, Whiz Bang going. Ian very early started managing Tyler, so he's been his only manager, right? And so, the wild thing is that, Ian, having been, a disciple here at Create Huntington, knew that, like, hey, we'll just try anything, man. We did like a vegetarian festival. He and Kibi in Huntington, and like they would just try anything, man. And like, so doing Healing Appalachia, they knew it was National Recovery Month. They knew that Charlie lived down by the state fair, so they knew they could get the state fair. They knew that they knew musicians, and so they got, a handful of musicians. I think Kelsey Walden was on that first show, Justin Wells, who played again last year, which was awesome. And then Halftime Bluegrass Band and Tyler, and so really they didn't even have any staff. I mean, like they got some folks from the recovery house to help out, because it was really just Ian and Kibi. They had one golf cart, and they ran out of water at the first festival. They had 1,500 people, and and so it was really one of those things that really early on they understood that, hey, we can't do this alone. And so we like to say in West Virginia, that Country Roads is our stadium anthem, but Lean on Me, that Bill Withers, he wrote it about growing up in a coal camp in Slab Fork, West Virginia, and not everybody having everything, right? So everybody can bring something to the table. Your neighbor may have a car and you got a refrigerator. This is back in the day, right? And so everybody got something, you bring it to the table, and we're going to make something beautiful together. And so that's sort of the impetus for, and I say that's our mantra and our motto for the best of Appalachia, for the best of America, right? Is that lean on me mentality. And so they really had to like punch that card early on, because just couldn't do it alone, right? And so that's been the beautiful thing, is that, we put up the bat signal and said, hey, we're doing this thing. And then all of a sudden, of course, like so many musicians have had so many friends pass away, or they themselves have been wrestled with the demons of substance use disorder. And so they, folks like musicians, I call them second responders, right? Like artists, like, so the EMTs are the first people on the scene, then they go away, and then when you have the house fire, or you have, a situation, somebody's got cancer. Well, who is right there? And you see this in Nashville all the time, in LA, right? The fires happen, bam, huge outpouring with every musician you can name doing, they want to jumping in on the wildfire recovery concert, right? So musicians, so very early on, we had a lot of cool people like saying they wanted to be a part of it. And so that's grown. And then, so we did it 2 years. They did it for 2 years at the state fair. And then of course, COVID hit. So we had 2 years where we had to like come up with something, right? And so I remember that first year I just came on the board, and I had just written about the festival before. But I came on the board and I'm like, well, do we have any footage from the festival last year? And they're like, oh yeah, they videoed everything. So we just got clearance from everybody and we showed the video, called it An Evening with Healing Appalachia. And so we were able to keep the vibe going. And then that second year, we had Tyler and the boys come up to James Barker's studio here in Huntington, Green Valley Road, and they taped a live session. And that was the first time that Tyler had, because they're right in the middle of COVID, and they were off the road. But that's when he first did Space and Time, by everybody's good friend, S.G. Goodman, who's from over in, Western Kentucky. And so after that, when we brought it back to the state fair, people were hungry to meet again in person. And I think that was a thing that we did find, right? I think COVID was interesting in two different ways. One, it helped all of us normalize mental health. I think everybody had a shakedown, like, hey, mental health is health. And you know what? Being alone and being isolated ain't healthy. You know what I mean? There was even a study they did at New York City. I saw it in the New York Times, that said just being alone is like smoking a pack of cigarettes a day if you're not out like with people in a community, right? And so we're going to see that in the next probably 20 years. You're going to see like that community is defined as one of the additional stools, legs of the stool of good health, right? With mental health and physical health, right? And so, and then the other thing too is that we very much appreciated and had a newfound appetite for going to festivals. And so we came out of that and like really hit the ground running, and so the last 3 years we just kept building up. And one of the things that I did when I came on board is that really wanted to bring on a lot of partners that help us like holistically heal Appalachia, and then put on a festival that's like healing of the land and the people. So brought on Zero Waste Event Productions out of Southern Ohio. They did 40 events last year. They're America's largest zero waste event company, and then so we had and then also like Candid helped us pay for that last year. But then last year brought on like Reverb Music Decarbonization Project to be solar power the festival, so sort of bringing on, and then also using the festival as an activation. So the music's there, but then you have so many people there, you could activate people to then go out into their communities and do good work. So we became the world's largest one-time distribution of Naloxone. So at the last 3 festivals, we've given away, at the last 2, we've given out 20,000 doses of Naloxone. And we got that much to give out this year as well, thanks to great partners like End Overdose out of LA. And then a bunch of the other recovery groups that help get that Naloxone out there. So that's a little bit of kind of how it got rolling in the beginning. And and then the unique element, and you can ask me about this more if you want, is that the people that we're helping were the people who were on the journey. And so it's a very unique festival in that it's a FUBU festival. It's for us, by us, right? So as the Damon John term, right? And so we activated, empowered, trusted folks who were going through recovery, who people weren't trusting maybe 6 months ago to do anything, right? They're just checking into a house because the court said they had to, and when they're done with them, right? So the folks at the different recovery houses, they would vet their people, and they would let people come to the festival. We camp them out like a big summer camp, and then they would go and we entrust them. We would train them and trust them to work the festival. So they would build the stages. They would help us with hospitality. They would help us with security, and they'd help us with this green team and the sustainability. And this idea with the sustainability that no longer can we throw away the people or the land of Appalachia or America, right? Everybody's precious.
Mm-hmm.
This land is precious, right? We only need fresh air and fresh water to survive on Earth. Let's take care of Mother Earth, right? And so we're giving folks in recovery a look outside themselves, like that I had since I was a kid, right? And then showing them that also there's a stewardship when you take care of the land, when you take care of other people, you're taking care of yourself because you're building community. It's like the mycelia, right? If you look at the, some of the mushroom documentaries, and you see how the mycelia have all of these interconnected tissue and networks where they feed the roots and the trees. We're sort of building that out with Healing Appalachia. I never really thought about that until now, as I'm kind of saying it, but it's a little bit of, we're doing that. We're doing that in the underground, right? The people that people have thrown away. We're building this interconnected tissue that's beautiful, that's so strong, as strong as anything. And it's really powerful. It's the most powerful thing I've ever been around. It's really neat. Yeah. So one neat thing about the festival is that, as you know, like being in media, you go to a lot of festivals and you're like, hi, this is Jay from Rock 105, or what, you have some like really fancy MC work happening, right? And I love those people. I did radio forever, man, and got to deal with amazing people like Clint McElroy and Cletus C. Judd, who's in recovery, and a bunch of folks, Judy Eaton and stuff. And so, we have, like, from the beginning, and this has been so cool. So in between the acts, the music acts, we'll have some up and coming, like acoustic acts, but then we have people in recovery, just kind of a wild range of people, kind of crazy quilt of different people, different sizes, shapes, colors, ages, backgrounds, tell their story. How did they get to the top of the mountain? Where were they? And they can just say whatever they want. You know what I mean? And so that part of it's been really neat, And so we've had these really magic moments in Healing Appalachia where we had a guy, Kenny Matthews, and he works for different organizations now in West Virginia, Drug Intervention Institute, and also doing a lot of work in recovery and with families of incarcerated individuals. He's on a board for that. But Kenny went up and talked, and there was a guy in the crowd that had been a prison guard over Kenny for 15 years. And he didn't think that Kenny would ever, we saw him say this to Kenny. He's hugging him and he said, Kenny, I love you, man. I didn't think you would ever get out of prison. I didn't think you would ever amount to anything. And I'm here to tell you that I was wrong. And so we've had these kind of like magic moments where we put people on stage, maybe weren't that polished. He was pretty good, actually. Kenny's awesome. But we just want people to tell their raw, real story and see how that moves people, And so that's always been a part of Healing Appalachia, And some of that we blend in with folks who are like Alexis Plias from New York, some people who have like, stood up and like, very strongly, as strong as anybody in the world against big pharma, And so we definitely kind of blend that with different people, but that's been a fun element of it from the beginning.
And Dave, one thing that you've said during this, there have been many, but one thing that's really standing out to me that I think is really important for people to know is that addiction thrives in isolation. And we saw that in 2021 when a record number of 101,000 Americans died of overdoses during the pandemic when everybody was quarantining. When you hear these things, that is not the first thing that would come to mind, building a community. But now thinking about it, it makes total sense. What advice would you give to somebody who's dealing with addiction or who knows someone who's dealing with addiction? What advice would you give them as far as first steps to take to overcoming it?
Yeah, for somebody who's like a family member, or for somebody has a family member, or somebody who's like in addiction.
I think either way.
Well, a couple of things. So I know that for family members and for folks who want to help someone in addiction, Mr. Rogers used to always say this, and he said, when you want hope, you look for the helpers, right? And so that, the thing that you try to get someone to someone who can help on a professional level, right? And so, that's the most important thing, is like try to get people to, someone, because a lot of time, I have an old quote like that says, you can't tell nobody nothing, like nobody's going to listen, you know what I mean? And so like if they're really in the throes of addiction, it's just so important to get them to somebody that they trust, admire, and try to get them that help, and know that it could be a long road. We've had people that come up to us at Healing Appalachia and said, I've gotten Narcan 20 times, and so it's real easy to give up on people, and so I would say that, I know families get worn down. I would say families too should seek help from there's a lot of great organizations out there. There's a lot of help. People doing good work in advocacy to like help the families to like try to figure out how to navigate it. Because here's the thing I would say is that it's not. And Jan Rader always says this. So Jan was like one of Time's 100 most influential people, right? And very much influential in the way that the EMS and fire respond to opioid addiction in the U.S. So Jan always said, you know what? There is hope. She said, you know what? It takes a person that with opioids, it takes about 7 times, of trying to get better to do it. But with cigarettes, it takes 9. So it's not insurmountable, right? And so we know that there's about 22 million people in the U.S. that are in recovery from opioids and from drug addiction and or alcohol abuse, right? And so, or substance use disorder, right? So we know that there's hope. We know there's this light at the end of the tunnel. And I would say that, if you're in the throes, try to figure out what's triggering you, and, sometimes that means you got to find some new friends, and you may have to change, just like change changing the city doesn't help sometimes, but you do have to like stop and, take care of yourself. I don't know. It's a tough one. You know what I mean? It's like we've just had one of our musician friends, that just had to go back to rehab. And so, it's painful. We know a lot of major stars. Steven Tyler and different people still late in their life are having issues, and so there's no magic bullet for what causes people to, get better. But we know that being alone, doesn't help. Talking to people does help. And sometimes, we don't want to be vulnerable and tell people our problems. But, like I said earlier, we know that early childhood trauma really is the thread that runs through substance use disorder pretty heavily. And that we know that if you can just talk to somebody and talk about your problems and, try to get out your trauma in a healthy way and try to find healthy things to do, I always find, that, and there's some great groups like Phoenix Group. They have meetups for people in addiction recovery for that's physical. So we know that releasing endorphins and getting out in nature, we know that music therapy really helps. It gets people on a higher plateau spiritually and also mentally, and and also is a chemical thing with your brain, right? And kind of can transport you. And so finding the things that trigger you, staying away from those, and then trying to dive into the healthy things that will make you better, because it's not precarious. It's one day at a time, right? For folks. And, it's easy to slip back into bad habits. And so it's good to surround yourself with good people and positive things, positive podcasts, whatever it is that, maybe triggers good things in your life. Just kind of surround yourself with all the good things. I always say this, life's short, stay away from the haters and the BS, like try to like stay on keep on the sunny side, as the Carter family used to always saying, that sounds cheesy, but it's helpful, man. It's easy to go down a black hole, if you're listening to some of the music that you were when you were in active addiction or something.
Yeah, no, I could not agree more. I think that choosing to surround yourself with good people and consuming good content, it is good for the soul. It is uplifting. And I do think that it's a fact. It contributes to your mood. So if back at the time when you were using or having those issues, you were listening to certain music or consuming certain content, I can immediately see how that would very easily be a trigger. And Dave, What's one thing that gives you the most hope right now in the fight against addiction in Appalachia?
Yeah. So, you know, it- people were pretty stunned when this fact came out last year, right? That we had 110,000 overdoses, 2 years ago, and this last year it went down to 80,000, right, in the U.S. And it's still a lot of people. I mean, it's like we said, it's still the Vietnam War was 58,000 people,
Hmm.
so we just lost 80,000, mostly young people, you know, taken out of the workforce, taken out of families. But the thing that's impressive about that, it was the largest 1 year decline. And so we're seeing people that are solutions based, like at our festival, we give out 20,000 doses of naloxone. We normalize it. Our friends at West Virginia now Drug Intervention Institute, they're in every state giving out the one box that my friend Joe Murphy created. And so that's just like a first aid kit for naloxone, getting that out all over the US. Our friends at SOAR, West Virginia, they had 2 sites in Kanawha County in 2020. In 2025, their Save a Life Day is in all the states, coast to coast. Last year, they gave out 86,000 doses of naloxone at about 500 events in 32 states, right? So you got these just ballers out there, grassroots groups that are crushing stigma, that are normalizing naloxone, that are saying everybody's worth it, all lives matter. They do actually. That wasn't a great slogan back in the day, but but it is true. It's like it is true that we all matter, and so I think that that gives us great hope. Like we come to the festival, and there's 90 service providers. They're all doing this amazing work. Sometimes in these little pockets of Appalachia where the state government and everybody else is throwing rocks at them, right? And they're down there, whether it's Mayberry and Mount Airy, North Carolina, wherever it is, where you think everything's perfect, and one of the largest overdose capitals in the US, you got people doing the good work. And so that gives me great hope, that we're starting to like get a hold of this thing. Now, my friend Matt Christensen, he just had a great article, I think it was in the New York Times, about talking about, okay, we have these numbers, but we need to like double down on what we were doing, right? And we also need to keep studying, the opioid addiction and recovery, because we're not sure exactly what caused this, but we know unscientifically that there was just so many people pulling on the reins. And so that feels great, man. And especially like with Healing Appalachia, we're able to bring on people. 2 years ago, we had Trey Anastasio, and so, Trey like telling his story. And right before, he opened up Divided Sky up in, Vermont, where he's run into a lot of resistance, And so we know that like there's people out there on these big levels and at these rural levels and in the cities, like AJ and everybody at End Overdose out in LA, like people are coast to coast doing this work, and those people are beautiful and they inspire me. They inspire us every day, and so that's why we love Healing Appalachia. It's just that place where everybody can come, and we sort of think of it as the Jose Andres, kind of idea of we don't need to build more walls, we need to build a longer table. So we're building a big long table, and everybody's welcome at it. And so I think that hopefully we'll see the day when we don't have a bunch of overdoses, and that we just really push that down, right? And that we give people hope, through community, through good jobs, through connections, through music and love and art, right? And all that good squishy stuff. And so we love that stuff, man. So we just are spreading joy, and we are joyous at the fact that the overdose numbers are going down. Because at the end of the day, we always say we put a lot of money and juice into harm reduction, because you can't get better if you're dead. And so we don't care, like if it's your 20th overdose, guess what? You're somebody's dad or brother or sister or cousin. We don't want you to die. You got to stay here with us, the Great Spirit has a work for you, Yeah.
And Dave, looking ahead, what's your vision for the next chapter of Healing Appalachia and Hope in the Hills?
Yeah, so it's kind of exciting. I mean, I always say there's no easy way to move and no easy way to put on a show, right? And so we're doing both this year, so we were 5 years at the State Fair of West Virginia. We were as comfortable as an old shoe there. We love that staff And, but we're thinking that, originally, Charlie and Tyler and, Ian, they were all talking about, hey, let's move this around like Farm Aid, not thinking that, hey, we're just like an all volunteer board that's like tiny, and, we just kind of got Tyler, and then we got to like, scrap for everybody else, beg and, throw out all the fishing lines to get people involved. But we're going to Kentucky this year. And I would say that, Andy Bashir's team and the folks at Lindy and everybody with the Department of Tourism has been just exceptionally well receptive to us. And they are, like a lot of good parts of West Virginia, just very solutions based, and so we've been so the next chapter is sort of like, we're doing this, we're spreading it out a little bit, right? And we just got a new executive director. We've never had an executive director. So we got Logan Terry, who's a wonderful person, the great grant writer. And he's out of Nashville, and he's very music based. We love him. And so he's going to help us take it to the next level. And, and sort of like, I think our next level is just like, we're finding friends, right? We're finding the Matthew Perry Foundation and Reverb, and, those kind of people, Kelty Tents, all these people, and then the local people that want to help, and so that part of it feels great, that we haven't went out and scrapped for people that Hello in There Foundation is big friends and partners with us, and they're there, Celine Thaxton and Fiona Prine, they're there for people on margins, right? And so we feel great. So that next chapter is just like sort of strengthening those bonds, and then see who else we put up the tent, and see who else wants to come into that tent and make some magic with us, and that magic of community, and using magic of the gathering and the Healing Appalachia to make it into a movement to take back to your hometown and make some difference. And you don't have to do much difference. Just be a little more empathetic, be more a little loving and kind, maybe donate to your local homeless shelter, or to your, go down and serve some food, and go meet some people in recovery. I think people will be like, as a journalist, I've just interviewed every kind of person, right? And I've never felt more inspired, growing up my whole life in church. I've never felt more inspired than just talking to Faith in Action, like a miracle walking, like somebody that's died and they came back to life, and here they are, and they've changed their life, and they're making impact. I mean, that's beautiful, man. You can't make that stuff up, right? And so I think people would be shocked at how wonderful it is to meet somebody in recovery, how inspired they would be. And they would poke them to be like, well, what am I doing? Am I walking dead? Am I using my time here? Am I using my energy here? Am I using my resources, to make this world a better place? And I think that folks in recovery will they will inspire you to do that, man.
And Dave, what is the best way people can get involved and contribute to Healing Appalachia?
Yeah, so we have a website. It's just healingappalachia.org. And so you can go on there, and we have we got lots of merch. We're music folks, so merch it up, and and then you can come to the show, and so this year we got we're gonna have 3 days, but 2 big days, with like Chris Stapleton and Molly Tuttle and Remy Wolf, and of course Tyler. He's gonna add some special guests, and Infamous String Dusters, all kinds of cool people. Jesse Wells, the little Jesse Wells, who just burned down the Newport Folk Festival. So we got all kinds of really, really cool people. So just come and listen to some music, and then know it all goes to a good cause. So everything above, the production cost gets plowed back into like really good things happening. So just hook up with us online, and we'd love to hear your stories. Or if you have a recovery group out there, or you're doing a thing, we'd love to hear more about what you're doing, and be inspired by what you're doing. And we love more partners, and we love to connect people too, because we know about a lot of good things happening. So we try to connect different people, who are doing things, right?
And the festival this year is on September 18th to the 20th in Boyd County Fairgrounds, Ashland, Kentucky.
Yeah. So for folks who don't know where that is at, so that is right on the Country Music Highway. We name it so because there's been 170 million records sold off the Country Music Highway. So you're talking about everybody from like Loretta Lynn to the Judds to Billy Ray Cyrus to Chris Stapleton, Tyler, Ricky Skaggs, Dwight Yoakam, Patty Loveless. It just goes on and on and on. Bobby Bear. And so there's a ton of people, Tom T. Hall, tons of people that are from that area of Eastern Kentucky, and then also just over in Southern Ohio, there's some pretty amazing people as well, like Bobby Bear. So, but anyway, so we love bringing it back home, and celebrating Chris Stapleton and Tyler, who literally are from like 15 minutes away. So, and they're so big, there's no other place to put them. So we're putting them out in a big, this really cool a spot above the Boyd County Fairgrounds. And it's kind of interesting, Alexander. It was like an old strip mine back in the 70s, back in the day. So it is kind of this unimproved site that's like a Woodstock of sorts, but to me, that's sort of like emblematic of where we're at, right? We're bringing folks in recovery to a place that looks just like an open field with, a lot of cool trees. It's really beautiful, but this kind of unimproved site, and we're trying to do a lot of improvements to make it really cool. But it's like sort of starting from scratch a little bit. So it's like, I like that, man. It's like, it's kind of building something out of nothing, or we're building something out of a place that people thought was nothing with people who people think are nothing. So we're kind of like doubling down on, let's do good with what we got, and what we got's a lot. So more than you think.
And Dave, if you could go back in time and offer your younger self one bit of advice right before embarking on this specific journey, if specifically tailored for you in your life, what would it be?
Before doing Healing Appalachia, yeah. Wow, that's a good one. I mean, I probably would, for 100%. I should have gotten better at spreadsheets. So luckily we have this thing's gotten to a point where it's like we have which I deal with those, but we have some really amazing, and that's been the beautiful thing too. We got a really cool group of folks, like Ben Eisenberg. We have like he built us he used to do the logistics for the World Jamboree and the National Jamboree at the Boy Scout reservation. But he's built us out like Symmetry, like a homegrown ticketing platform, right? So we're trying to like do all this thoughtful and like make that washing machine economy. So I guess I wish I could be better organized in that sense. But luckily I got a lot of amazing people. I'm more of a storyteller, and a connector. And so I guess we're all ignorant just on different subjects, I guess, but I would maybe have sharpened a few more of my Swiss Army knife tools, probably, because like it does take it takes a village, but it takes a lot of different skill to put on a festival of this caliber. And I don't know, my younger self, I definitely would have never have thought it would have grown to this point, and we couldn't do it without so many amazing people. So we now have about 900 volunteers. And 400 will be camped out at Camp Grindstone.
Wow.
400 will be camped out at Camp Grindstone. And so it's just really going to be a beautiful thing with all the folks in recovery. And, so that we love that. And, we got Matthew Perry Foundation on board to help us take care of those folks in a real mighty way and a kind of consummate way too. We got a lot of wraparound services for them. It's like a real fun summer camp for them, get them out of the house and really you can just see them growing as a community, growing as people, and growing, in also a career pathway. So they can look at, we got people that, we got a gal last year who worked the festival and did the rigging and stuff. And she's now out on the tour with Metallica, and so we are doing, on the back end of this thing, year round, we're like snapping in place some like professional workforce development, projects that give people a national certification for stagehands and that kind of thing. So we can get more of those folks out on the road, to work the entertainment industry, which is very much gone sober. And two, they need more people because everybody's touring because, you just don't make enough streaming, right? So you got to be out touring, whether you're Willie Nelson or you're, just started out. So anyway, we're trying to really like use the festival to then teach folks a skill. They don't care if you got a face tattoo and a felony. The touring industry is cool with you. So that part of it's fun, man. I mean, like the activation part of it, I guess I would have, I don't know. It's, I don't know what else I could have done to prepare, but, we're just trying to, you know, ride the rodeo ride while we can and hang on, you know, and ask for help when you need it. I would say that, I was a journalist, I always said there's no dumb question. And I think I would tell my younger self also that always ask for help if you need it, because guess what? People are really willing, able, and honored to help.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I think what you're doing is absolutely amazing. I have so much respect for you. And I think that the world needs more people like you, because you really are making the world a better place. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with me today.
Well, thank you a ton, man. I love how the podcast is like set up and how you're like showing how people are just like so bold and you know, doing it, you know, and doing it one step at a time, one day at a time, and then gathering energy, you know, and gathering people and making change, making collective change, right? So I love it. It's, you know, life's short, you know, it's you got to do what you can, where you can, while you can, you know. And that's the old Jimmy Carter, you know, mantra, you know, and I trying to live up to that, man. I mean, just, you know, it's honored to be a small part of this organization, and appreciate your time and all you're doing, you know, out there.